If I wanted people to kill you, I would spread rumors related to their value systems about things you do that is the antithesis of what they believe in. Keep running it over and over again and tell horrible stories about it, even though there's no basis for it. And so if people go over and throw things at you and they destroy you, I've communicated my will using old language or my wishes or induced behavior in other people that I had use for. Now, people say, well, I was angry. I didn't like what she did at all. All that behavior is induced. It must be induced. If all behavior is induced, according to Loeb, we are robots, which is what Loeb was trying to say. And he didn't mean we are somewhat robotic. He meant we are robots. That's what he meant. Mark as well. Some of the body processes are mechanical, I admit that. You know, you drink water, you urinate, you defecate, you take in food. That's also a robot. But there's something else that people have difficulty with. You still lie down on the grass and you watch insects crawl in your own language. You're aware of lying there and watching the insects crawl. Because a robot just sits there and photographs the insects and saying, tap it on the shoulder and says, did you photograph insects Wednesday? He says, what is Wednesday? What is Wednesday? What is Wednesday? You see, you lie in the grass and you can see those insects and you can feel the dew, the plants, and you can see the morning sun come up and the birds rise from the ground and you can smell the water and you know that you're sitting there smelling the sea breeze, not just smelling it. And then when you touch sand and feel it run over your fingers, you know that you're lying there, not only feeling it running over your fingers, but you are experiencing something, not just merely a mechanism going over the fingers and recording sensation. And they call that awareness. That's what people call awareness. And we call it something else. Would anybody want to venture a guess what a mechanism might say about the fact that a person is not only watching a beautiful sunset, but saying, here am I sitting here and perceiving the sunset? Oh, it's a hard thing to say, isn't it? From this
One more
point.
groove pattern. It's a complex groove pattern.
Yeah. What you're saying makes sense to me, but I can guarantee that that won't communicate anything to your fellow artists. So imagine you're talking to them.
Well,
You got to search.
the robotic pattern, there are neural grooves in the brain that cause a certain behavior pattern. What happens is that this awareness groove is also there, and you could also put it in a robot.
I would agree with you. I think it's well stated, but it would never sell.
It would never sell? Oh, I know.
Your people.
I'm not trying to sell it.
Anybody else want to go ahead? The people that you basically associate in the theater world.
Oh.
I mean, they'd hear what you said, and it wouldn't sell. And it's very hard to put it in a sellable package. Anybody else want to try to talk about it? Any way you want to talk about it? That factor that makes us say, well, here am I doing this, and I'm aware of it, I'm conscious of it. You got anything to say about it? Other than additional grooves? Yeah.
No, it's chain association.
You know what he means by additional grooves? Suppose if I had the chance to do this, and I'm doing this to help you understand a certain type of in-depth, sophisticated level of human behavior. Now, this is a simplified drawing of a phonograph record, okay? And in this phonograph record, I've got any subject matter at all, say a discussion going, okay? And let's say that John picks up this record and he breaks it. There's a crack in it. You've seen that happen occasionally. All right. The needle lying in the grooves of this record has one mechanism that rides in the groove and bounces up and back. You know how a record player works. The needle is shoved up and back. And now, when you speak, when you sing, it moves that needle up and back while the record's turning and it cuts grooves like that. A groove, and it bounces up and back. As you speak, hello, Joe, it bounces up in the same manner. And then as it is bounced up and back, it repeats that system of sounds through an amplifier, and you hear it as human voice. Now, that is a probe needle. Now, inside, this is the new dimension that I'm adding to the subject. Not only does the needle have a point, and is it hollow, but it has another needle in the middle. And in that needle in the middle, it just has a round bottom, and this is the groove amplified. And it has a little tiny ball in there, steel ball, with a very fine hair through it, like that. And as you come to the crack, Whenever that ball moves away from a coil, it says, oh my God, the record's cracked. That ball is a sensor to pick up the new phenomena. Picture a needle just right. It don't give a shit whether the record's cracked or not. It'll go right through the record and it'll make a noise. But if you put a little tiny sensitive ball in there, the new vibration will shake that ball. And whenever that ball is shaken beyond a certain range, it says, my God, the record's cracked. There's a track there, see? A separate path. And every time it goes, it says, my God, the record's cracked. Now, if the ball bounces too much, it says, my God, this record is cracked in so many different places. Now, suppose you said, how many different places? Then you have to put a counter in here, a little electronic counter. And when the record makes 1 RPM, it says it's cracked in 11 places. One crack is 3 inches long and the other is 2 centimeters long, or whatever. See, because that can be picked up. But suppose we did this. Suppose we made a needle inside of a needle. I don't know if you've ever seen tubing like that, where they put one tube in the other, 15 different tubes, and each one was a different sensor. Now, the next thing now, some records in the early days were made of Bakelite. And phonograph records, when I was a kid, was nearly a half-inch thick. A lot of people don't believe it. Is there anybody that ever saw a phonograph record a half-inch thick? Is there anybody that has one? Did you ever see one a half-inch thick? That's a hell of a lot of Bakelite.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you couldn't even bend it. If you hit somebody with it, they die. Now, the Bakelite, when polished, had a certain texture. And the vinyl records have a smoother texture. Now, there's one needle in this whole barrel of needles that is texture-oriented. It responds to texture. And when the record is playing, it says this is a high-quality vinyl record. And if you took it off, it says this is an old Bakelite record. All it's doing is responding to texture. Does that make sense to you? That's what people call consciousness. People, human beings who don't know how to talk about certain aspects of human behavior, they talk of mind, awareness, in-depth probing. In-depth, a human being that has an in-depth method of probing has more needles than the average person. Like, for example, I'm walking out in the street with one needle, and that needle is riding a groove, and lightning occurs, and I run, and I hide in the cave. Every time lightning occurs, I turn my face away from the outside of the cave. I'm operating with one needle, and most humans have 1 to 2 needles, and so they suffer a great deal. The more needles you accumulate, meaning probes, that's what I'm talking about. The more probes you accumulate, the more distant the relationship becomes between you and your former associates, because they always operate with 2 needles. Now, suppose then it was possible, say here we had 50 needles for probing just different aspects of the record. Does anybody know what a wart is in a record? When you twist the record, the needle goes up and down a lot. Well, I'm sure you can now understand that a record player can tell you that the record is warped. Now, what would you have to do to a record player to tell you that the speed is not right? In other words, sometimes you ever have a record player that's slowed down? Now, suppose you want to put a probe in that needle. What kind of a probe would it be that would tell you the record is slowing up? Roughly. Doesn't need to be exact. What type of mechanism? No, more mechanical.
Something
Or
that
like
registered the speed.
something to register the speed. You know how fast your car is going? In essence, there's a little, in the early days of a bike, there used to be a roller against the wheel. You ever see that little gadget that roll? They'll tell you how many miles you're covering, how many feet or yards or whatever you want. So they put a roller against the record or under the record, and if the roller is spinning at a given speed, these little flyweights or the little balls on a lever system spin out a certain distance. As the record slows up, they move in. And that could then produce a mechanism that would make the record spin faster. Self-correcting system. Now, suppose the person didn't crack the record. Suppose the person pulled on the record while it was, if you were able to do this, while it was spinning, pull on it. And you wanted the record to be aware of that. You'd have to there are things that they make today which you probably didn't know about. It looks like tape, masking tape, and they put that tape on an airplane wing. They just run a strip of tape there. And when it takes off and the tape is loose on the top wing, it's loose. On the bottom wing, it's under tension. You see why? Because the air lifting it pulls the wing up, and the tape indicates the air load. So you could make a record with conductive material through it. Whenever it's stretched, it's lesser conductor, and whenever it's compressed, it's more of a conductor. Now, how much consciousness do you want a record to have? What you call consciousness. How much awareness do you want a human being to have? There are many human beings that tell me they're excessively sensitive people. They consider themselves so sensitive that Rolling Stones annoy them. I don't mean the music. Just Rolling Stones down the street annoy them, or anybody banging or emptying a garbage can knocks them over. And they tell me how sensitive and aware they are, though I always slip a half a buck under their foot, a big fat half a buck, and tell me whether it's heads or tail with your lousy universal cosmic consciousness. Just tell me whether there's a head or tail on that half a buck. You know what I mean? And they don't even know whether they got their foot on a thorn bush or anything else. There's a hell of a lot of people that don't have these probes that they think they have. Because whenever a person gets up and announces how sensitive they are, you can imagine a sort of a hippo with a callous skin. I always think that way when a person gets up to tell me how sensitive they are. Because a sensitive person usually doesn't tell you how sensitive they are. They don't walk around saying, I'm very sensitive. I'm in tune with infinite consciousness. See? Now, what the hell are you telling that schmuck for? If I were in tune with infinite consciousness, I'm not about to walk over to anybody and say, by the way, did you know I was in tune? I feel confident that I was. All right. Or sick. Anyway, the whole idea, the whole way of trying to talk about this would have to do with the sensitivity of physical probes. That's what you're talking about. So, you know what they call, an old psychologist, Paul Brunton, wrote a book many years ago called In Quest of the Overself. It's a lousy book, but if you're interested in a different idea, he believes that outside of a human being, there's a way of projecting yourself out there and watching yourself. Because people get up and they say, I performed in a play, and I knew I was performing in a play. I was not just performing like an actor, but I can see myself from the audience point of view going through the lines, and then you say something, the audience laughs. And you knew that just before you said it, that they might laugh. Well, you've got something on your hands that is difficult to deal with. Or they just tell him that his uncle was run over by a Mack truck and the audience takes out their handkerchiefs and weep. In other words, the actor, to a large extent, has 4 probes because he knows the story and he knows human reaction. I'm talking about a writer in some instances too. So when he writes and humans react that way, he feels comfortable. When he writes and they don't react that way, then he feels insecure or she feels insecure. Do you see that? So whenever you write a funny play and you get up and everybody tells their jokes and nobody laughs, then you feel insecure because your probe has to be changed. You take the old middle one out and shove in another one. You hire Bob Hope. Oh, sorry. And then he tells several stories and people laugh. You got a new probe. But since society keeps changing, you can't tell the same joke all the time. Either you hire Bob Hope or somebody else, or you keep your fingers out on society and watch their sense of humor. There's a little article I saw recently of something about morticians. Maybe some of you read this. Go down to the morgue, county morgue, to try to claim bodies that they had. You see, when somebody's run over by a Mack truck and nobody claims a body within so many hours or dies in the street, then they usually bury it or they send it to the hospitals so they can use it for student practice, autopsies, physiology, anatomy. And what happens is that a lot of the counties in the United States anyway, lots of areas, there are organizations to save the bodies. And they put up money, yes. Because there's some poor bastard, like say my father was lost for 10 years. He got hit by a car in Milwaukee and he lost his mental equilibrium and he was put in the hospital for 2 years. And nobody knew who he was. And all I remember is my father was missing. And one day he falls down the stairs, or he just collapses. They take him to the county morgue, and then they send him to medical school. Nobody claims the body after so many hours and cut him up. Now, we wouldn't want that happening to our loved ones. So there's a committee that was formed. Because you never know who it is that may drop dead or leave their identification home. And they said they were going to the airport and going to the Philippines, but on the way to the airport, they were hit by a Mack truck, and you think they're well on the way to the Philippines. So you think anything happened to your father? Oh, no, he's in the Philippines. So then they go right on to the autopsy room, you see? So this committee was formed to make sure that a lot of people that kicked the bucket didn't have that happen. So they would put up $500, $250 for burial of these poor bastards. Maybe $150 or $50 the cheapest burial you can get. And so this is what they do. The morticians go to the morgue and they claim the bodies. They said, well, yes, we know this person, and his name is Sneed, since they don't know who he is anyway. So they take him out of there, and they get $500 from an agency to bury the body. You know what I'm saying? That's why they location is not in. All over the country, this is done. No, that's an interesting thing. They got their probes out into the values of society. As the values change, they got to change their probes. That's why a guy that's been in prison for 400 years, when he comes out, he buys a suit with a hat like that. Because that was the hat before he first went to prison. That's his probe. That's his values. Do you see? And you look at him and you laugh. Because your hats look like this now. They're derby hats, you see? And you laugh at this guy. And 6 years later, when you come out of prison with your derby hat, somebody laughs at you. Because they don't wear hats, or whatever the hell it is. So here you're always talking about man and probes. You're talking about women and probes. But you're never talking about communication or consciousness or ideas. And the problems that human beings have, stated in unorthodox terms, are really related to something I'm going to talk about now. It is that many people have no identity. Now, here's what that means. That's the old word, no identity. They really don't know who they are. And so they look around for movie stars or people that have identity. And they lean close to them. And then they feel they have some identity. Do you understand what I'm saying? Anybody have difficulty with that? You're famous, you're well known, you're the best golfer in the land, and I'm a nothing. When I walk down that street, people come over and say, why, you know Ann. That's right. I like my cigar. I think. I says, you even walked on the golf course with her. And she even gave you some of her golf clubs and asked you for your opinion on them. And that gives you identity. Not you, but the very fact that you're with somebody with it. There's a hell of a lot of people that have added up their levels of consciousness, I'm using old language, and found it to amount to zero. They work with a calculator and found that they have no existence at all. They walk down the street, nobody turns their head. Nobody. They do a backflip, and people go right on reading the newspapers. And there are a lot of people that get up and they recite and they do wonderful things. They dance and dance. Gee, you want to be a plumber. And so you have no identification. And there's a lot of people walking around. And if you ask them who they were, here's what they say. They say, I know Joe Fasulo. And that's the way they picked up. And then the guy says, did he move out of town? You say, yes, he did. Then they drop you. But you have no identification with them either. Because you don't mean anything to them. Oh, mother, there comes a typewriter sale. After you purchase a typewriter, and the guy is paid off, he has no existence. That's why I mentioned many times that a cab driver calls a human being a fare. That's what you are to him. You're a fare. Come in, well, after the fare's gone, you're gone. But in a restaurant, if you're a waiter, there's a big tip coming in. But there's nothing else. Or there's some baggage I have to carry if you work in a hotel. And so this is the way you see people, and people without identity have a role that they've been given. The role is given you that you stand up every morning and play the violin thing outside of a certain window. And that's the role you play. And then those people come out of the window and they grin. And everybody says, when you play that again, when you play it again, then they all grin. So you play the violin right, people grin, they smile, they nod their head. And that's, you know that you please people, but you don't know who the hell you are. Now, if you get your pleasure in pleasing others, that's dangerous. If you're brought up to get your kicks pleasing other people, then everything you do calls for a smile and approval. And that is a dangerous state because it seems that there's very little that you do to find richness in your own existence. All your life, you become habituated to scoring with somebody, making the grade, winning approval. And that's no identity that I'm talking about. The real identity is when you do whatever you do, whether it's build your own roller skates or cartmobile or anything you do, and you feel that you are the vehicle that made that, and that you don't depend too much upon approval. And to get the real identity, there are a lot of people in this world today that do a lot of things that make a lot of people laugh, especially jokesters. And I'll use Bob Hope. If Bob Hope goes around making a lot of people laugh, he must have utter contempt for people because he has so much predictability about what they're going to laugh at. Bob Hope, I'm trying to say something in all this kind of conversation. Bob Hope would respect a person that didn't laugh at his jokes. Here's what I mean. Suppose a person says, well, I can tell you the origin of that technique that you use, which is based on the old man in the sea, whatever joke you told. But the guy proceeded to show the social structure of the joke. Bob Hope would say, well, I see you're some kind of analyst in terms of structure and humor and philosophy of humor, psychology of laughter. And Bob Hope would tell several other jokes, and the person sat down and proceeded to show the structure and the origin of that joke. What happens is Bob Hope feels uncomfortable with that person, respects that. Here's what respect means. That person has some kind of knowledge, superior knowledge, that I don't have, that I can't use. So Bob Hope must be a very insecure person, or any professional entertainer that depends on the public for approval. Now, a person doesn't have to be an entertainer. They can be what you call an individual out there in the world. How'd I do, boss? You're doing it right. There's hope and promise. Then you walk out feeling good because he said there's hope and promise. But he might later say, I'm very disappointed in you. I expected somewhat more. A person of your intelligence, I did expect more. So you walk out with your head down. What I'm trying to tell you is, I'm trying to say there are other levels. I'm going to use old language. Other levels of awareness. And the maximum level of awareness to achieve is non-approval, not for approval, but the sense of well-being you get sitting looking at the sea. The sense you get alone looking at that sea. But if I wish John were here to share it with me, then you run the risk of not having any identity until the other person looks at you and says, yes, it is beautiful. If you depend on that, you tend to remain a cerebral cripple. Now, let's not talk about whether it's human or not human. I'm just talking about certain laws governing behavior. Now, if you have difficulty or require elaboration on that, now's the time. Fire away. Go ahead. What would you like to say about it?
No, you use old language. Could you clarify that? You keep saying old language.
Oh, you're
That's
relatively new.
new for me.
Okay, old language is,
old language.
if I say Carl's a nice guy, that's old language. But if I say Carl reads the same kind of books and keeps up with the same kind of news that I'm interested in, I identify with him. He couldn't be a nice guy, because to you, if he talked about the things he was interested in, he wouldn't be a nice guy. He'd just be somebody talking about some subjects I don't know anything about. This isn't true, what I'm saying. Or I wouldn't be interested in it. So, old language, a person says, I'm in love. Now, the new language. I find it terribly lonely to spend time looking out the window, and I met another human that is as sick as I am and filled something needs. Now, if you went around saying that, the person's, my God, I thought you were in love. I am, he said. Because they don't know what love is. Love, the kind of love I'm talking about that most people have a problem with, is because they don't have self-identity. I'm not saying with self-identity you cannot love anyone. I'm saying that you can love people. I'm just saying that if it becomes a dependent habit, then you're in trouble. If it becomes a dependent thing, and let me show you what that means. Let's assume that my fingers moved at your will. You couldn't make anything out of clay because her fingers were paralyzed. All the nerve endings were eaten by certain types of bacteria. So her fingers hung like that. But mentally, she knew exactly how to move fingers, but her fingers wouldn't move. And whenever I came into the room, the always says, Fresco, pick up that blob of clay. I picked it up and I put it on the table. Now move your thumb 2 degrees to the right, and pretty soon a beautiful configuration came up. You know what I mean? You would feel good because you create it, but you depend on me. Now, if a Mack truck goes over my fingers, you're in trouble. Mm-hmm. That's what love is. Love and what you would call depending on other people to override problems put you at the mercy of this person's fingers. And whenever we do something and we don't succeed, that's old language. Whenever I do something, I don't try to succeed. See, let me show you what I mean. If I want to make a ferry boat that doesn't sink, I might fill the hull with plastic bubbles. I might do that. And he says to me, did you build that ferry boat that won't sink? I says, I'll let you know in 3 weeks. Is that all right? Because I build the best ferry boat I know how, but I don't know that it's not going to sink. Does that make sense here? Okay. Now, if I build an underground shelter, big, fat, strong concrete dome, and put all the children in it, thousands of children in big shelter, and a 500 megaton nuclear bomb goes off above that dome and sets up compression waves, like that. And all these 500,000 or how many children I put in there, if they're sitting at a piano or listening to the radio during the war, that compression bomb goes off and they all die in exactly that position, standing up, sitting down, because all their cells have been cavitated, ruptured by the concussion. You probably didn't know this, but if you're in a submarine deep in the water and a 10 megaton nuclear weapon goes off, boom, it doesn't hit the submarine. It just compresses water for a moment like that. The air pressure in there is so great, it goes like that. It doesn't break the submarine either. It just squeezes and ruptures all your blood vessels and all your capillaries and all your cells. And people are just standing there with bloodshot eyes, in whatever position they were in last. Now, Joe says, I thought you built a shelter for these children. Since not knowing about what a 10 megaton bomb can do, and not having any of that, I don't feel guilty about anything. I just did this because that was the best I knew how to do. And he says, Jacque, you save the children. If I build that, I take his hand off because it makes you feel very bad. Because he's now putting me up there, and if the kids die, I die. And so don't put me up there. I don't know if that'll save the children. Got any other suggestions? No. I said, then we'll put them in there. Is that all right? But whenever you do something, don't do it with that godlike sense that what you do is sacred and final, and everybody puts you up on a pedestal. That's dangerous. Just do it, and when they say, is that the answer? I say, wait and see. That's the attitude of the research scientists. We'll give them 9 pills or 9 pills and wait and see. The blindness disappears, the toes are rotting away, and now the kneecaps are falling off, but the man can see. So if you find a way of treating a certain disease where the person couldn't move their hand, now they can move their hand, and the guts rot away. See, the point is to do it and wait and see, but to receive the approval first, and be proud of the honors you get. If they honor you, you make an artificial heart for the person, and everybody starts to honor you. Those people are dependent people, because people that are saner, and if you made a synthetic heart that worked on somebody, I'm not going to blame you one way or the other. I'm just going to say that that seems to serve fairly well at this time. And I like your work, and I like the quality work, and I like your concern, but you also like me for working in a coal mine to make it possible for you to keep warm in the winter. You understand what I mean? But there's nobody that's against anybody or for anybody. They would just like to see constructive, general constructive attempts. But whether it works or not depends on too many unknown variables. Therefore, stop receiving prizes, and stop receiving demerits, and stop looking for approval. That's a hard thing to do, because the whole idea of performing is for approval. Whereas the research scientist really doesn't always want answers. Sometimes he is or she is reinforced by a non-answer. Now, I'll show you what I mean by a non-answer. Suppose I had a glass here, and I would pour water from a container into that glass, and the water didn't touch the wall of the glass, stayed away from the wall of the glass. Now that's going to cause this person to open his mouth and, hey, now that is interesting. I wonder what's going on there. And if he's non-scientific and he pours water in a big glass and it doesn't touch the wall, he says, hey, Joe, look at this. Joe, look at this. That's fine, bang. Hey, put it away. Now some people would find that glass most interesting. What has happened to that glass? Well, along the same lines, I'm going to repeat something else in old and new language. Okay. When we stack the dominoes, as you see here, and all of you, I'm sure, are fairly familiar with this, when you knock this domino down, the others repeat, and they fall in a row. However, would you say that is this domino that starts the whole thing? Would you? Oh, but there's somebody that shoved that domino, or something, right? Some little fat finger, like that. right? And if you say, well, it's this goddamn finger, and you keep going up, you'll find other things, attitudes about dominoes. So what you always find is that what we call a decision is there's always a whole series of events that occur. And some idiot along the way says, this was the decision. And that isn't even the decision. So what we call a decision is that there's a whole series of occurrences, and some people select this one as the decision, and more sophisticated people can go back and see a sub-decision. Is there anybody who has difficulty with that? You might not change the wheel on your little girl's kitty cart until it makes noise that annoys you. See? He may change the wheel because it might make noise. You can see the tire coming apart, which might annoy him. Does that make sense? And she might make the whole tire wheel of solid rubber rather than depend on the plate before she even bought the wagon for the kid. Change the wheel. Now, each system for making decisions, I'm going to ask this question. You made the most appropriate decision. You saw the problem could occur, and so somewhere down the line you did this. And down the line somebody did that. Down the line somebody did that. At all these different points, what they call a decision was made. But what enabled you to make an earlier decision? Experience that they don't have, right? And they don't understand how you could have made a decision because they don't have the experience you have. I'm trying to say that there really are no decisions. There's a series of events. And John, in all this, says, hey, right here you made a decision. I said, no, John. I made a decision over here. He says, I don't get that at all. Because the tools that we use for making decisions are different. It's like, let's assume that you work with children who are very difficult, emotionally confused and psychologically mixed up. And yet, when you did studies of children, you found that children that murdered people, ruthless crimes, had patterns when they were very young. They did certain types of things. Not one, but many things. And you found correlation between certain kinds of behavior and a spec, a guy that stabbed the nurses, you see. Now, if you begin to see children in the early stage and you tell that mother that that child has to be helped because 10 years from now the child might be capable of doing this, they think you're psychic. But you don't have any psychic vision. You've read a handbook on disturbed personalities, and it says some of the early signs is they start arguing with the lamp and it doesn't go on, see? And they give you other things. They twist an object that somebody gave them when they don't like the person. They can't twist the person because they're emotional cowards, meaning they've been hit every time they pinch the arm of their little brother. Mother kicked the shit out. See? So he took an object of little brother and he twisted it and bit it. If you catch children doing a lot of, I'm exaggerating here, a lot of strange things like that and find that it correlates with the eventual behavior of certain kind, then you got the handbook of correlation. First you learn the ABCs, then you learn to spell, then you learn to read and write. See, and it goes up. So does human behavior. There's no psychics. So when you tell me, now you're the one that did the studies, see? You say, Fresco, you better put that little boy of yours in a mental institution. He needs help. I go like that. I don't see anything wrong with him because I don't have the tools you have. I says, you go to a mental institution. Now, the idea, a decision to send that person to a mental institution, it comes from a different system. Now, my boss, that has a better decision-making system than I have, says, why did you wait so long to make that decision? I said, well, I talked to the kid for 3 hours. He said, wasn't it obvious the first 10 minutes? I said, no. He's mentioning, I said, no, I didn't. And then, he was sitting on your chair. He was rocking it up and back and scratching the leather. I said, no. And kicking the metal rim. I said, no. And chewing on your pencils. I said, no. All right, now, his boss said, well, when the kid came in, couldn't you see the hesitancy? And they didn't know whether they wanted to come in or out? I said, my boss says, no. So we don't make decisions. We have moments when we react. When I say, she says, dirt, nothing happened. Then she says, da-da, nothing happened. Then she says, shit. And I get a little angry. Then she says, fuck. I said, leave this one. So what forces a decision on my part would be my association with vulgarity, whatever it means to me, see? And so the triggers of what they call a decision, and then there's a sub-decision and some mechanisms that in turn later on will force you to make a decision, but you don't feel those things until they become gross enough for you to say, never use that kind of language in my home. But there are many people you can watch, some of you probably can do this, you can see a person moving toward a decision. Like if you went to the sweet old lady's rest home and you got up and told some pissy jokes, with pornography, you're bound to get a certain type of reaction. And so you would, in advance, know the type of reaction you're bound to get. And so what happens is, any decision-making system means that there seems to be some overt behavior at some point, which normal people call a decision. The behavior prior to that is really more interesting, because this is a sub-decisional behavior. And then before that, you have earlier signals. Are any of you able, or to some extent, to predict some kind of behavior on the part of other people prior to the decision? Are you able to see a decision being made by the general self-conversation? People say, no, if I went there, this would happen, then I better go there. It'll be easier for me to go to George's place and pick up a cab there. You've seen people in the process of making a decision. And you almost know what you call decide upon, what we call the dominant point at which they react. I think that the dominant point is below the actual action pattern. Okay. There's another type of decision that people seem to make. And instead of making a direct decision, like a child says, Mother, I'm going to the beach today. And she says, why, it's raining out there, you damn fool. There's no sun out, the waves are up, there's a lot of mosquitoes, or whatever it is. And so the child says, learns how to speak this way later on and make a new decision. He says, or she says, that I don't know why Bentley is thinking of going to the beach today, Mother. Because Mother says, because Bentley is a fool. It's going to rain, it's going to do this. And a human being learns how to ask a question of another person by using the man in the green hat. Somebody else. You're not loaded. All right. Now, suppose you stole something from a teacher. Suppose you stole a whole batch of stamps and some bottle of glue. And you felt terribly guilty about it. And due to your church training and habits, you wanted to meet the teacher after class and confess to ease that conscience which they gave you in the first place. And so you wanted to ease that. So you waited for the teacher, and then you told her. And then she slapped your face and said, I thought highly of you. Now you're nothing more than a common criminal. And usually, if you don't go to pieces, the next time you do something like that, you walk over to the teacher and say, one of the students in the class removed something from your desk. I know who it is. I don't feel I want to tell about it. But I need your guidance in how to handle that type of, well, that student deserves it. And you say, well, I'll try to assist that student. I will not inform on that. But anyway, there are people that have learned how to act way up here, and it's a decision-making system, but you don't even know it because they're talking about something else. Now, say I'm about to marry this girl, and I'm worried about certain things, so I say something like this. My brother's been a respectable man all his life, and his wife went to bed with somebody else. And this girl says, why, I cut her tits off and hang them up and set a flame underneath them. And that'll give you a rough idea of the values of that person, you see. Instead of waiting for an event to occur, you see, there are people that do this all the time. They don't wait to be crucified. The bottom fall. Most normal people wait till the bottom falls out. They're falling down through space and say, why didn't you tell me you can buy a parachute? No, they are very elementary in their decision-making structure. Okay. If you know what I'm talking about now, then one of the basic mechanisms for suffering and emotional problems is to surrender yourself to an authority. And you walk over and see that person knows so much more than I do that. So many things. I don't know nothing. What you do is you work with that person. You say, hey, how do you make eyeglasses straight so they don't drop on? They show them how. But you don't surrender all your decisions to a person. You surrender decisions that are appropriate to surrender. Here's what that means. You're a master of tightrope walking, and any time I want to know anything, I say, hey, how do you do this? And I make notes, and I listen, and I respect that. But if you know everything that well, then I do listen to you and I make notes. But when you start telling me that God gives you all that whispers into your ear at night, then I don't make notes because I can't deal with it. You have to learn how to respect another human being, meaning when you really understand extensionality in another human, and you accept that extensionality in as many areas that the person's extensional. But when you say, I'm so dumb, all they have to do is point and I'll follow. A lot of people do that. Suppose you make all my decisions for me. Because every time I do anything, and that's why a lot of people go to psychiatrists. Some psychologists like making decisions for people. Makes them feel important. And that cripples the person. And there are some therapists that call themselves non-directive therapy. And you're familiar with it? You say, my husband beats me and he burns the cat and he's pinched my ears at night when I'm asleep. He takes a rubber band and whacks it against my ears. And you say, what should I do? And these psychiatrists have learned how to say, what do you think you ought to do? That's safe as hell. What do you think you ought to do? Well, I'm not sure. Think about it and come in next week and call me. So, now if he says, why, you ought to tell that rat off. You son of a bitch, you hit him with a rubber band, it hurts. And then it shows you in the hospital with your bones broken. Because the guy beat the shit out of you. You can't walk over and tell people off, assert yourself. That's on the assumption that other people say, hey, you know that person got a point there? That's on the assumption that everybody's all right. You can only assert yourself, and it would make sense if you got the effect you wanted. If I assert myself with a guy 9 foot tall, and he throws me off a bridge, on the way down, I asserted myself, and crash. So the idea is, I don't know when you can assert yourself. And so some people say, you know, what would you do? How do you feel about it? And in that way, they don't take your goddamn burden and point the road for tomorrow, what you're supposed to do. So here are some of the mechanisms of human suffering. And to deal with them and to understand what it is that you're looking for, or why this super dependency need, or why this leaning always, it is necessary to lean on a crutch, because a crutch has a real function that enables you to get around. All right, there's a time to set it aside, or maybe never set it aside, because I depend on the crutch maker. And then the next thing comes in, you want to take time out to learn how to make your own crutch in case something happens to this person? I said, Mr. Fresco, I've got no hands, and I can't make any crutches. And then I've got to design a system that deals with my own limitations. You see what I mean? Each system cannot be optimal, but could be based upon your limitations. But no one must stop at some point saying I'm a limited soul, because they've got to always climb in some areas in an attempt to overcome those limitations. Any questions about this kind of thing? If it's a little far out or anything you want clarified, press it now.
Are you saying that intuition would have
Intuition
place
is
in-
a decision-making system that you don't know you have.
Oh,
See, like if I knew that in the church, whenever they, or you know what an esoteric group is? Like, say, the Thalamites, if they pour a little wine in everybody's cup and just a little more wine in your cup, it means that that person has to be looked upon with great suspicion. You know what I mean? If you don't know their decision-making systems, you say, oh, well, it's nice of you to give me a little more wine. You don't know whether it was nice of them or what their planning is. So we don't always know the other person's decision-making system. And everybody seems to get it intuitively that you're not right when you give them a little more wine by the director of the institution. See what I mean? That's the esoteric language of the group. You follow that? A person could show their feeling toward you by a signal they've generated without this in the early days. It was this. Remember that? That was obvious. And when two people were fighting in an arena and the guy was about to kill him, the king went like that and they killed him. Now all the king had to do was light his cigar and they'd kill him. You don't have to have that obvious signal. All right, a decision then is a signal to you, but not to Anne or anybody else. Some people say, how do you make decisions so fast? You ever hear that? Now, here's what that means. Let's assume you can see 5 times as well as I can. And you can see. Remember this illustration? This is a bad drawing of a lake. And some of us have looked at lakes when the water got thin that were frozen during the winter. And there is a specific pattern of changes in color in the ice. It gets whiter and milkier. You ever know thin ice? Do you know the pattern? So when you and I are walking on ice, I come from the tropics, and I've walked miles on ice. I don't know what patterns to avoid. You do. And I say, I admire your quick decisions. You just have an eye, and when this image falls on your eye, you have something in your brain related to that. Watch out. I don't. So even if your decision is forced by pattern, see what I mean by that? No, I don't have a pattern. Therefore, I admire your quick decision-making system. And you say, thanks, I've always been quick at making decisions. So I remain dumb. If you point the signals out to me, and I say, boy, you're smart. You say, no. See this foot? Fell through the ice once. Oh, I thought you were smart. How can you ever be smart without having fallen through the ice? The smartest people in the world have fallen through more ice than anybody I've ever met. I always find that everybody I ever met that I considered smart has scars on their feet and their lives from falling through ice. And normal people think they never fall through ice. That's how they fall through ice. The guy that braced the airplane wings saw his brother's plane fall apart midair. And said, well, you're smart for bracing that wing like that. People ask me why I put so many nuts, bolts, screws, and rivets in any of my structures. Because I've seen a house blown away in a hurricane once. Lifted off the ground, blown away. Now, putting all those nuts, bolts, and screws in a building doesn't mean it won't be blown away. But the probability is less. Does that make sense here? So the decision to overbuild comes from particular sites that you see. So I want you to understand that, if possible, that a decision is a serially related thing. Okay, any other questions? I don't know if I've answered your question. Anything else about that area? Okay. The thing I'd like to impress upon you in closing is essentially this: that when you find yourself looking to somebody else for a lifestyle or total guidance, it could be dangerous. But when you look at it this way: when you're a teacher and I look to you for information and learn how to use a camera, so you can say, Jacque, you can handle a camera well enough on your own now. That's good. But when he only tells me just enough, I can't get by, and I depend on him, that's a trap. Whenever I'm hired by any industry to do one job, and I cannot move up from that job, that's a tyranny. Is that right? Whenever you have a relationship with a person, the person says, you're too dumb to handle that. Let me handle that. That's the tyranny of the situation. When the person says, you're not qualified for handling that, or identifies your insufficiency and shows you how and enables you to handle that, that is love, warmth, respect, friendship, good fellowship, humanism, but snatching it out of your hands and not allowing you to move up is contempt. Is that real clear? Meaning at least within that realm. Let's go for coffee.